Hello, everybody. This is Jacob from Maine, and welcome to Kratom Sobriety, episode 19.
Thanks, Jacob. Today we have a conversation with Matthew, who will be celebrating 2 years Kratom-free this fall. Wide-ranging conversation from the limits of substance-specific recovery groups to his love of bright eyes. We're going to talk about medicated assisted treatment, one of those lightning rod topics in the quitting Kratom world. But before we got into that, Jacob, I know that you tried the 12 steps and you found that it wasn't right for you.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I did find the 12 steps programs. The first one was AA, and the only one actually. I went to that when I was trying to quit alcohol, not a long time ago, but several years ago. And it didn't work for me. So the first thing I did was I went into the AA subreddit and I bashed every single person I could find about how the 12 steps were stupid and there's no God and higher power and all the crap. Oh, no, of course I didn't do that. What I did was I took some advice from a podcast, but I don't remember which one, or it might have been a counselor I had at one point. But basically they said, usually in a program of some sort of recovery, there's going to be things you like and things you don't like. So you take the good, you leave the bad. And if it's not for you, you try something else. So that's what I did. I tried something else. I tried smart recovery when I was quitting alcohol addiction. That worked really well. And now with Kratom, I'm also doing smart recovery, but I supplement it with another program called Mara that we've talked about before.
Yeah. So the point here is just there's not one size fits all. And just like Jacob didn't go and do a bunch of AA bashing, he just kind of walked away from it and decided that wasn't right for him. And Matt isn't the right choice for everybody. And I know some people have had really difficult experiences with it, especially with the withdrawals coming off something like Suboxone, and feel really strongly they want to warn the world about it, especially in a Matt safe space and a Facebook or even in a Reddit discussion. It's important to let people who choose Matt to sort of have some peace, with that choice.
There's this thing where people often say that the withdrawals were the worst withdrawals I've ever went through, but they never usually qualify it. And I know that takes a little bit more time, right? If you're posting in a forum to say and I used it for this long and I came off at this dosage. That would be super helpful to people. Whereas just saying it's the worst withdrawal ever and you're making a huge mistake, it doesn't really help. Particularly for people that have already made that decision, because now they're even second guessing it and starting to worry about it. So I think people will have to share their honest experience. And I know people have had bad experiences on it and they should be free to share those.
And as Eric said in the interview last week, don't take advice, especially around medications from, people on the internet. Always consult with the physician. And I know the Matt controversy, people have a lot of skepticism about the Western medical establishment. There's a for-profit motive. Feel like big pharma is pushing these meds on people and big pharma wants everybody to be on some kind of medication for long term, and it's to drive profit. And there might be some truth in that. And doctors like to prescribe stuff. That's one of their main tools. We're not going to talk about the helper meds today, things like clonidine and et cetera. There's two broad categories, medicated assistant treatment, and they're not the same.
Yeah, the two categories are there's the opiate blockers, and those are things like naltrexone, naloxone, Vivitrol. They're all essentially the same thing, I believe, and they are just essentially block the ability for an opiate to get into your brain. So Kratom is a partial opiate antagonist, or at least that's one of the compounds in it. So to take that, if you're on Vivitrol, it's not going to work. Then there is opiate replacement, and these are usually partial opiate antagonists. And what they do is they don't activate your opiate receptors, but they fill them so that you don't experience cravings and withdrawals if you take the right dose. I mean, don't maybe isn't the correct word, but they help lessen those symptoms, and people find that it allows them to essentially live a normal-ish life without having to take their drug of choice and keep abusing it.
In general, the opiate blockers don't have the withdrawals that are associated with the subs. All medications have side effects. Talk to your doctor about that. there is some stigma around the subs because people perceive that as people are getting high from it. And that's not necessarily the case.
I'll just give you my personal experience. For me,
Yes.
I'm in medicated assisted treatment. My dosage for what I take daily of Suboxone is quite low. It's about, well, I don't know if it's quite low, but it's on the lower side. It's like 4 milligrams. The only time I've ever really felt anything from it was the first couple of days when I was over medicated. And if that is the high that they talk about, it's not very fun. I didn't feel good. I felt, really just like literally over medicated. Like I had taken too much of something. It was unpleasant to say the most. So, but once I worked with my doctor over a week and we found the right dosage, and ever since then, haven't really felt anything. Maybe a little bit of like energy or something in my head, and I think it's more psychosomatic than anything. But that's about it when I take my dose in the morning. For me, what seems to be a prevalent opinion of some folks that are very critical of Matt, it's like, well, you're not doing the work, or you just you're bypassing recovery. And it's like, no, it was a last resort. Like I literally tried everything else for a long time. I mean, you can listen to my story on the podcast that I did, but it's it wasn't something I went into lightly, and it was also a harm reduction mechanism. I relapsed like a bunch of times, and I felt like it was going to happen again. I was even scared at that point that I was going to, relapse on alcohol or something else, because I have a history of substance abuse, and I just didn't want to take that risk.
As you were pointing out, Matt isn't just for getting through with the withdrawals. It can also help with the long-term maintenance of abstinence, because that you successfully actually quit multiple times, but it was, and stood those withdrawals, but it was the Matt is helping you stay off of it longer term.
Yeah, exactly. Like I got through Kratom withdrawals several times. Never like for very long, like 6 months or a year or something like that. But through the acute phase and into, being able to sleep again and starting to get out of the mental funk I was in. But yeah, it was more about the constant relapsing and trying to just break that cycle. A lot of times what I see in online forums is people talk about, the withdrawals are terrible from Suboxone, and that's all that, that you're just better off going off Kratom, because if you can't take Kratom withdrawal, you can't do this. And it's like, okay, that is potentially true. Like, there is no disputing, in my opinion, that, and I'm not a doctor, so this is my opinion, but from what I've read, if you're going to just quit Suboxone cold turkey at, anything over a milligram, even, less than that. I've heard people withdraw from like, 0.25 and sometimes even less than that, and they still have, a decent or bad withdrawal experience. But if you don't taper at all and you just jump off Suboxone, it's going to suck. It's probably going to suck a lot worse than Kratom. It just is. It's just, you're taking something that's stronger and you're taking a lot of it. But that's not what you're supposed to do. And the whole point of a MET program is you're working with a doctor. You've got a support system. You're not just, if you're just going to taper yourself off it or just jump off it, yeah, it's going to suck. But that's just one aspect. They don't seem to chime in and factor in the fact that, okay, but what happens next? If you're at risk for relapse, and where I think this is particularly problematic is there's a lot of people on Kratom that were on opiates before. And, if they've been on Kratom for a long time and they decide Kratom isn't working anymore, they can't get off it. They're going through cold turkey. Kratom's not working. And then they're like, well, I'm just going to go back to opiates. There's a terrible fentanyl drug supply out there that can potentially kill them very, very fast. So I think the relapse part is really overlooked. And that's a big thing that I think people should think about when they're giving advice if they've had a bad experience. Like, take that into consideration, maybe.
Matt is a form of harm reduction on two levels. It can prevent you from going back to a more deadlier substance. And two, while you're on Matt, it can reduce the harm that's going on because of your Kratom use. If you are spending most of your paycheck on Kratom, or if it's starting to have bad health effects or mental health negatives, using a Matt that is doctor supervised. And like you said, it's not just a medication. There's usually a whole program with the medicated assisted treatment, structure, accountability.
I know there's some programs that like you can that there isn't that component. I did that with alcohol at one point. You know, I read all these books and I was clean for a while and I hadn't drank and I was feeling really good. And I said the three words that no addict ever wants to say. Those are, I got this. Stop working a program. Next thing I know, I'm in a smoke shop buying Kratom, and then I'm taking 4 extracts a day, and then my life is going back to shit again, and it was just a spiral. So most programs, if you're going to be on a mat drug, they're going to want you to go to meetings. You're going to get drug tested. You're going to have to, see the doctor every month, sometimes weekly at the start. So there's a whole accountability system and recovery aspect to it, which I think is really important. So it's not just medication. There's a whole other part of it. And I know there's some telehealth services and other services now that it's easier for doctors to prescribe it that don't have that. But even if you're doing that, that's totally fine. Just get yourself into a program, in my opinion, because I think you need to work on, why you were using as well. And that kind of gets into the medication aspect a little bit. What I always find interesting about medication assisted treatment is it's like I compare addiction to type 2 diabetes, right? There's an element of choice you could argue in both of those, right? Because an addict, the first time they use the substance, they're making a choice to use it. Someone that's having a poor diet that's leading them to get type 2 diabetes a lot of times, they could have chose, I guess, not to have that diet. But the difference is no one's out there yelling at people with type 2 diabetes that they shouldn't be on insulin. There's like, no one would ever say that. But medication assisted treatment, there's this like very, very vocal group of people that seem to just be dead set against it, to the point where, like, I think if you ask them, like, well, do you think it's better for someone to be at risk of relapse? They would say yes, because they're not truly in recovery, in my opinion, which just don't agree with it necessarily.
Yeah. And that my last point creates an opportunity for stabilization. And then you can make those lifestyle changes, those recovery steps. And I'm not a doctor, but I'm definitely would not recommend to be on MAT long-term for the rest of your life. Work with your doctor to figure out what the time frame for you is the best, and like you advocated for yourself, you were initially on too high of a dose. If you listened to your body, it wasn't working for you, and you worked with your doctor to lower your dose. Self-advocate, make informed choices.
Before we wrap on this part, when you're talking to people coming off Kratom, if you had a bad experience with Matt and you want to truly caution them about what happened, I think you should totally do that. I'm not saying don't speak your truth. You definitely should. But just remember that, they may be substance addicts that used other things beforehand that you're not factoring into their history. And so just be maybe if you're going to engage personally and try to give a little more information and ask them a little bit about their choice versus just giving a blanket statement.
Thanks a lot. This is a great discussion. And now for the interview. Hello, everybody. This week we have an interview with Matthew. How would you introduce yourself to the world?
Oh my gosh, I read that question in the when they were sent to me originally, and I'm like, God, that's like a big question. I would say how I see myself and how people see me are probably very different, just because of the journey I've been on over the last 2 years. How I see myself, I'm a dad to 2 children now. I just had a little boy 2 weeks ago. I'm a nerd. I played video games professionally when I was younger. I traveled around the world and won money, and I like to read books, and I'm by and large pretty introverted. And that's not really how I would imagine that people see me. That's like the image as I exist in my head. I'm little, like I weigh 130 pounds. I'm always fascinated by how different how I see myself is versus how people perceive me. That's how I see myself. How I'm perceived and how I exist to the outside world is that I'm like an insane, like hybrid athlete. I like to run really far. I like to lift weights. I'm super into boxing. I have this weird, two different versions that kind of coexist. And I have been and always will be a drug addict, first and foremost. So I've definitely struggled with Kratom, but I have struggled with many drugs through my life. So it's for me, it's just not a Kratom specific issue. It just happens to be the most recent. I always joke that like my drug of choice is like free. Like I just would do whatever. I've always been like that, unless I'm practicing abstinence, which I've had a lot of luck with over the last 10 years. I've had a streak of being clean for 6 years, a short relapse, being clean for 2 years, a long relapse of 2 years, and now I'm about to get 2 years clean here in November.
And congratulations, a newborn. How much sleep are you getting nowadays?
Man, it's pretty rough. No, it's actually, I'm getting way more than when we had my daughter. My wife has been way more involved in the nighttime stuff than when we had my daughter. I did a lot of the nighttime stuff. My daughter, because I was on Kratom. That's the reality. That was a big part of my relapse, was having to stay up with the baby. And then I would like volunteer for it because that was just my time to get, as sad as that is, to get high and have that like extra energy or whatever you want to call it. Kratom's such a weird drug. And that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons I've been drawn to talk about it, because I've abused so many different drugs in my life, and Kratom is easily the weirdest one by far.
So what is your current Kratom abstinence date?
So it's 11/17 of 21. So I'm coming up on 2 years clean. For me, it's just an everything abstinence date. On that 2-year relapse, I was only using Kratom. I mean, I definitely have a specific identification with my propensity to try to abuse that drug. But if denied that drug, when I'm in addict, like full on addict mode, I mean, when I'm using and it's really gone off the rails, I will use drugs I actively hate, like that I despise, because I am just not a normal human. And that's kind of been the journey, is trying to make peace with kind of that. I always think of Dexter. He's got like the dark passenger. That to me is like how I view my problem with substances. When he's running the show, I just become a totally different human. But I appear as a totally normal human on the outside. It's all spiritual wreckage for me. So
when you say spiritual wreckage, so it didn't have some of the classic problems of physical problems and like arrests and job losses or car accidents and things like that?
So I did not this time at all, which made it a very unique experience, and really what I attribute to, or what I consider to be the biggest, most insidious part of like Kratom addiction, is that I was able to keep the plate spinning. Like I was able to keep up appearances like just by the skin of my teeth, just barely getting by. And there's this concept called the distance beta paradox. And it's basically this concept that if you take somebody and you put them in an uncomfortable, like the best way to explain it is if you have somebody that's in a bad relationship, but the relationship's not so bad that they're going to leave that person. They would be better off if they were in a horrible relationship, because then they would break up with the person and then go find the person that they're supposed to be with. That to me is like Kratom to a T. Is that it's the reason it's called the distance beta paradox, because it basically says like if something was a mile away, you'd start driving a car to it. But if it's anything under a mile, you're going to walk. So it leaves you in this eternal walk, because the damage is never bad enough to where you have to take the car. And so what should be a 3-minute drive is a 50-minute walk every day, and it never gets bad enough. They've actually studied it with like terrorist attacks, where people that are closer to the chaos usually recover quicker than people that were further from the chaos. So it's just a fascinating like problem, I think, of the human condition, just that like if that water just gets turned up real slow, it's hard for us to recognize we have a problem. And or it's hard for me to recognize. It was hard for me to recognize I have a problem. I don't want to project on other people. That was my experience with it. And I definitely think that was a unique thing, having abused so many different drugs through my life. I mean, all the other ones ran me off the road so fast. It was so obvious. And this is the only one I've ever been able to use and like not lose everything immediately.
Yeah. So when you were talking about spiritual wreckage, you were specific to Kratom and your most recent relapse. And I totally relate. And not to project on others, but the majority of people I talk about Kratom addiction, it's a functional drug. The major consequences, maybe the biggest one might be money for some people. That was my case, especially if you get into extracts, but even people that buy a lot of powder, eventually it starts costing. So before we discuss your struggles with other drugs and alcohol, what was your first experience with Kratom? And
yeah, so I was trying to parse through my memory, right? Because I've been on the recovery train for over a decade now. A lot of this stuff was a long time ago, but I remember when I was trying to get off of Suboxone. I remember I had a buddy that was trying to quit illicit opiates, street drugs, and he had just introduced me to it. And I didn't really think much of it because I was abusing so many drugs that it's like, I always think of it, it's like I would always make pot brownies and then I would smoke a bunch of weed while they were making, and then I'd eat them and I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell. So it was like that. I don't even really remember it being too significant, but when I was reintroduced to it, so I got off Suboxone after, I think I was about 22, 23. I'm 35 now. I got off Suboxone and I didn't really understand the gremlin of addiction yet. And I was just like, oh, I'm just drinking and smoking pot. And for me, that was clean. I mean, I had been abusing opiates for like 10 years. So when I got off Suboxone, I was like, I am free. I made it. That's so common in people that aren't familiar with recovery, and like that dark passenger that I've gotten to know that lives inside me. They think like, I made it. They'll have like 2 months clean and they'll be like, I made it. And it's like, dude, this is a long game. It's getting clean is super easy compared to staying clean. This is kind of a tangent, but I have seen people throw away the most magical lives you could ever dream of, ever. I knew a guy that owned a multi-million-dollar company, box seats at local NFL, NBA team, mountain climber, government contracts for the whole state. And I watched him throw it away in like 6 months with like almost a decade clean. Like,
wow.
It does not discriminate and it does not go away in my experience. It finds other outlets to. So I quit Suboxone, was drinking and smoking pot for about 6 months, and I was feeling like I made it. Like I'm just a normal guy. I just drink beers and smoke weed, and it's no big deal. And I was working at a car dealership, and one day I got real drunk, and I hate drinking. I was just at a party, and I got real hungover. I woke up so hungover, and I remember like the dark passenger was like, "Hey, you know what would make us feel better? A little bit of that Kratom. Remember that stuff that guy gave you that one time? It's not that hardcore. It'll be fine." And so that sent me on about a 6 month to a year only abusing Kratom every day, just taking handfuls of capsules, and I was still pretty young. My relapse this time as an older person was way different because I had funds and a life. This was just like, how can I get $20 to buy as many caps as I can and just take them all at once? And did that for about 6 months, and that's when I got clean for real for those first 6 years. I still have the journal I wrote down. I need to find humans that can help me. Like, I can't do this. And that's how I was introduced to 12-step fellowships, which I am not coming as a spokesperson for. I am but a flawed human that has made and very likely will continue to make horrible mistakes. So I don't want to be the representative for anything. it completely changed my life, and I was able to get clean, and I got clean for a long time. 6 years is a pretty long time. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to it, and when it first got its hooks in me before my inevitable relapse after 6 years clean.
I love that. I need to find humans that can help me. That is,
yeah. I think of it. I always think I have like a weird photographic memory for online, like intellectuals and books, and I always think of the scene in Into the Wild where he's like dying and he writes, "Happiness is only real when shared." I always think of that where I'm just like, that's the moment I had where I'm like, I need people help me.
Yeah,
So.
And just so you don't feel out there on the limb, I first got sober over 25 years. So I've had some relapses, and my primary drug of choice was alcohol. So I got sober 3 years in relapse. Then I didn't drink all my 30s. It was like 11 or 12 years. I really thought I was done with that after a decade, My conversations talking to you and the interview with Fritz, I actually just went back to a 12-step group and like reset my sobriety date so that on my phone, I was like, had all these different dates for everything. It's great that I haven't drank for 3.5 years, and I'm never going to forget the last time I drank or the last time I did Kratom, but for the purpose of my home group and with the sponsor, and I got a new sponsor. So why don't you talk about your relapse after the 6 years after, that first stint, like what happened there?
So I had a very short relapse. So I had been clean for 6 years. Man, this is so, I swear, like when I think back on like just the choices and the decisions I've made, the steps help me so much is okay, I got another quick tangent for you. There's a great Jordan Peterson video, and I know Jordan Peterson is like a weirdly polarizing political figure. This is nothing about politics, but he had this lecture called "You Would Have Been a Guard at Auschwitz." And it was just about how we have this fantastical idea of who we are and what we would do in like horrible situations. His whole point was just like, most people would be the guard. You'd like to think that you wouldn't, right? Like you'd be the hero, you'd be Schindler, you'd be pulling all the, you'd be risking your life for other people. No, you wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I'd be man in my post and try not to get killed, and it's just, I remember that had a big effect on me because I just know when I'm capable of horrible things. And that's a hard, scary thing to confront. And if you, in my experience, if I don't confront that on a long enough timeline, I will relapse. Like I have to look at that. What makes me capable of that? Why can I do that? Like, why can I lie? Why can I lie to the people that I love? Like what do that? Why do I do that? How can I not do that in the future? Yeah. After 6 years, I remember when I first got clean, I wrote down 5 things that I wanted. I hope I can remember them. It was, some of these are silly, but I was like freshly clean, I think I was 24, a good job, a cool car. Like I wanted a race car, an attractive wife, a house. I can't remember what the last one was, but it was like, I remember when I wrote those things down, they seemed so fantastical because I was like a homeless loser, just crawling in, help me. Just, can I get a day? Can I get an hour? Can I get a minute? So when I wrote those things down, they seemed like fantasy. Like I was never going to get those things. That's the thing about like reservations, right? Like we don't want to leave room for if, or, I got all those things. I got married and I owned a home. I had a 370Z. I had all of the stuff that I want. I had a really good career, and I went on my honeymoon. And the day I got back, I had a really bad stomach virus from traveling, and I went to the hospital, and they thought I had appendicitis, and they gave me morphine. Immediately, I got home, and I was just like, I liked that feeling. And I was like, I've accomplished all this. I always think of Lord of the Rings. It's like, why shouldn't I have it? Like, it'll be fine. And so I went to the head shop, got some Kratom, and I used it for about 3 weeks. And then I didn't want to stop. I was loving it. And I just didn't want it to, I knew what was going to happen. So I was like, if I tell my wife, I can just fix this. It's like it never fucking happened. And so I told her, and it was a huge thing, obviously. And I reestablished and I got clean. But here's the thing. So I was able to get 2 years off of that. And I was so angry and bitter. I was so closed off to like human connection in the rooms. I was just jealous of everyone that had more time than me. I was like this, just such a negative. It was like the darkest, most negative 2 years I've ever been clean. And it was literally pure like hatred and jealousy that kept me clean, because I was like, I don't want anyone else that came in after me to have more time than me. All these losers up. So I made 2 years off of that, and then that's when I had my big relapse, and it was really just a matter of time. I called this guy I really respect. He's the first person I call on my 2 relapses, and I was like, yeah, I did it. I've been using drugs, and he was like, let me guess, the rooms became the most messed up part of your life. And I was like, yep. I'd go, I'd see everyone, I'd judge everyone. I'm better than y'all. I don't belong here. I'm different. What are they? Terminally unique, I let that become the darkest part of my life. And then that's when I really realized that was the real one. So that was about 4 years ago. My daughter was about 3 or 4 months old, maybe a little bit older. I was trying to do the late nights with her, and I was just like, I know what would make this easier. I know what would make this better. And I went and got it. And I have never been more confident in my life that I was going to be able to control my using than when I went and got that. It was just like, it says in some fellowships, it'll say like, did you ever try to make a schedule to control your using? It's like, that's a red flag, right? That's not how normal people engage with illicit substances. They don't schedule it, right? They're normal people. But I tried to control it. And I made it about 3 weeks. No, a little longer than that. About a month and a half. I was like once every 3 days. I think that was the rule, or only on the weekends, or whatever the stupid rule was. And I remember that first time I dosed against my will. I woke up, I felt sick, and I was looking at it, and oh man, it was like standing in a tunnel, and I could see the train coming, and it was like a small light. It was like the bat. Have you ever seen Flight with Denzel Washington?
I don't believe I have.
It's great. It's about an alcoholic pilot. This is a spoiler, so tune out if you don't want Flight spoiled. It came out years ago. It's about an alcoholic. He gets clean, and he's going to have to testify in front of Congress. He's like this hero, but he was drunk when he did it. And they're trying to figure out if he was drinking, but he like had this miraculous plane landing. So he's like this big hero. He gets sober, and he's got like a couple months, and he's sleeping in the hotel, and he's got Congress the next morning, and he has a connecting room, and he's in bed, and he hears like a clicking, and it's the door to the connecting room that somebody had left open. There's like a buzz, and he like peeks in, and he sees like the little fridge, because they had taken his alcohol fridge out, and he's like looks at it, and then he goes and gets back in bed, and then you hear the and that fridge just, and it's like, it was like that, where it's like, and of course he gets wasted, right? Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And it was like that. Like I saw it, and it was like a wormhole to like what was going to be, I knew, like years of misery until somebody caught me. I was not going down. Like, I'm not going back. Buy the ticket, take the ride. Like I took it, and I just remember that was the moment where I realized like I can't control this. So it's like, let's see if I get off. Let's see if I ever get to get off the road. I knew, like, I know what I'm like when I do that. And it was like complete surrender to the dark passenger. Like, all right, cool, you're driving. We'll see where we end up, and that's just like the guard at, like, that's me being the guard at Auschwitz, right? Like, that's me just acting at like, I want to be the hero of the story, and I'm not. I'm not. I lose all control to be like the person that I'm supposed to be when I do that. So yeah, that was my big Kratom relapse.
And how did it progress from there?
Horribly. Just buying so much powder. Lying. Just the sneaking around and the lying is what I have. I have more guilt about that than I do about the drug use. Just the version of me that can like lie to my wife. I was like going to meetings, and the version of me that can do that is like the scariest human I've ever met. Just the sneaking around, bags of powder, that put it in my sock, that how can I get it here? How can I get it there? The ritual aspect of it, that can I go get an orange juice, or are they still open? It makes me super uncomfortable even to just talk about it and think about it, because when I'm not using drugs, I am not like that. I am a honest, great, nice, caring, helpful person. But when I put drugs in my body, I am just capable of just being just an unreliable liar. It just progressively got worse, and it got to the point where I was having like seizure-like symptoms a lot, a real bad muscle spasms. Like I remember one time I couldn't walk to the bathroom in the night. I woke up and my legs did not work, and I had to pee so bad, and I literally had to crawl to the bathroom and then crawl back and like get in bed. And I remember that night I told myself, like, if I wake up and I still feel like this, the jig is up. I'm coming clean. And so, and I did all every time I used after that first month and a half was against my will, dude. I threw it all out so many times. I made those foxhole prayers, and somebody I really respect that has a lot of clean time said, like, man, when I would do that, I would mean it. Like, it was not just empty, but I could not make it stick. I would get desperate, and withdrawals and the SSRI qualities of Kratom, such a weird drug, and the depression, and drive an hour and throw it out. And then the next day I'd drive back and get it in the parking lot. Like, it was just such insanity. The whole time juggling a job and the baby and my wife and all my friends that are in recovery. Every human I interact with is clean. It's just, the whole thing was it was like a fever dream nightmare, dude. Even now when I think about it, it just horrifies me. It is what it is. That's the reality,
Yeah, that double life of both being in the recovery community, going to meetings, and hiding it from a partner, soul crushing inside. What came to the impetus for you to finally quit almost 2 years ago?
So I wish there was a story of me being the hero, but there's not. So my wife took my car to CrossFit and found my stash, and she had taken my car a couple times when it was in there, and I would always think about it. I remember one time she had taken it and was going to go get groceries, and I had thrown it in the back seat, and I was like, this is it. That whole hour I was like, this is it, it's over. And she just didn't notice it, and it's just so she found it, and I had a ritual where I would just take a nap on my lunch break every day because I was high, that's what I would do. And so I was napping at probably 10 o'clock, and she came in, and she was like, it was that classic I'm not mad, I'm disappointed, which is so much worse. But
It would have been better if she was yelling at you and throwing things at you.
Yes, in the first relapse she was so angry, and in this one she was so calm. And it's just like the lies just stack up so high, and then you find, because I have this problem where, and I've learned this through step work, is that I have this defect where I think if I lie and no one finds out, it never happened. And that's what step work revealed to me. I've had is like, I don't lie anymore. And the reason I don't is because even if no one finds out, it still happened. And it's crazy that, like, that's what I mean when I'm like, I feel like I have this, genuinely feel like a sociopath if I'm not working steps, that I think that it's okay to just lie, and if no one finds out, no harm, no foul. And it was like it was finally staring that in the face, all those lies, like, you can't, there's no getting, like, this happened, bro, you did this. That day, that literally went under the covers like a child, and it was just like, I couldn't look at her. It was so dark, and I was so sad, and she was just calm. She was like, look, it's, we're going to figure it out. We'll get through this, kind of thing. Huge presentation at work 3 days after that point. And so I talked to her, and I'm like, look, I have to keep using for the next 3 days. Like, I have to do this presentation. I was like I'm like a career. having to do this presentation. So I rapid tapered over like 5 days. I was taking probably 30 or 40 grams a day. I just took like 10 grams a day for like 3 or 4 days. And that moment on the bed when she confronted me is like burned into my psyche. And there's this concept in distance running called the demon in the cookie jar. And it's basically just like your most horrible memory of your life and like the best memory of your life. And it's like cycling between those two when you're running and you want to quit. And it's like, when you want to quit, like, what are you running from? And I'm like, I'm running from that guy. And then it's like, all right, what are you running towards? And it's like, the thing you're most proud of. It's like that moment is just like so etched into my spirit that it just thinking about it like makes me feel weird. So yeah, it was horrible. It was traumatizing. It was traumatizing for my wife. There's a lot of wreckage there. One thing that was huge that I learned through this is that like when I do drugs, I hurt people because I don't have to hurt them to hurt them. They have a buy-in. It's like a stock option. They've bought a stock in caring about me. And when I use drugs, I devalue their stock. And it hurts the people that have bought into me as a human. And that's one thing I realized through the step working process is that like I hurt everyone, no matter if I'm seeing them or not seeing them. When they find out I've been using drugs, it hurts them. And I did a ton of damage to my wife and my family, and there's a lot of guilt there, but I'm working through it very intentionally. So I did 5 days of, I think, about 10 grams, and then I jumped from there. Man, what an experience cold turkey Kratom withdrawals are, man. They were wild. That was I don't even want to say dark. It was like weird. The whole thing, because you can't sleep. Did get 10 days off of work, so that was nice. So I did have some time off work. Coming off Kratom like changed my brain, and not in a way that coming off in no other drug has, in the sense of like it changed my personality. I have the most vivid memory, and I don't know if it was where I was at in my life or if it was Kratom specifically, but I just have the most vivid memory of sitting at my laptop. I think it was like day 8 or 9, and I couldn't sleep. And the nights are dark, dude. To me, the nights are a different beast than the days. Like, I've come off drugs enough to know that's when it's like you're digging a foxhole during the day, and then you're just crouching in it at night, and like the house is quiet, and when you just got no one. It's so dark, literally and figuratively. It's just dark and scary. That's what breaks people, is those nights. I was on my laptop. I just wanted to sleep so bad. And I remember I was Googling like black seed oil and vitamin C dosing and all the different tips and tricks, dude. And I just had this moment of calm washed over me. And I just heard, when I use the word spirituality, and when I say like I heard a voice, I'm not talking about like the religious connotation of those words. Like, especially spirituality for me is a really loaded word. To me, all that means is like, I've been meditating a lot, and when I'm meditating, get real quiet, I realize that I am not my running thoughts. So what am I? Whatever that is spirituality to me. And it doesn't have to be, it's not magical. It's literally just, for me, it's millions of years of evolution have created this thing called a consciousness in humans. And it looks at my behavior. It's like me looking at me. Whatever that is, that's spirituality to me. I had this moment. I was at my laptop, and I just heard this voice that said, what you're doing right now is the problem. Like, the drugs are not the problem. They're a symptom of whatever is wrong with you. And what you're seeking right now on this laptop is what's wrong with you. Like, this seeking to fill the void and the pain is your problem. It's not drugs. And I was just like, oh God. And I closed the laptop, and I was like, I'm out on pleasure seeking. I'm out. Like, whatever that is that lives in me that is like seeking. The best way I can explain it in a non-drug related way is whatever part of my spirit thinks the goal of life is to sit on my couch, cozy in a blanket, ignore my children, and watch 2 screens at once, Netflix on one, TikTok on the other, whatever part of my spirit thinks that that's my mission and my goal is the part that I realized that day. Like, I got to kill that part. That's like, that is what is wrong with me. And that manifests mostly through drug seeking when I'm using drugs. But when I'm not, it'll seek comfort in any way it can find it. Video games or smoking cigars or vape or watching Netflix or TikTok or the phone or whatever it is. I strive to just be cozy and comfy. That opium den sensation is what my like spirit craves. And I'm trying to fix that. And that was like, I started the journey to like break that habit from all parts of my life. And that's when I discovered Stoic philosophy. I started Googling around. I had this recurring thought that was, the suffering is the point. Like, I was suffering and I felt so bad. And I kept hearing this voice say, yeah, well, that's the point. This is why you're alive, dude. Why don't you get some of that? Like, dig your foxhole and like be a man. And that started me on a journey that like totally changed my life completely. I'm weirdly thankful for my relapse and for Kratom for that it like awoken this like warrior, this like grown up, right? It awoken this grown up that is just like, nah, man, we just get it done now. I don't care how I feel about it. I don't have to be comfortable. I can endure sustained misery, and I thrive in it now. So that's that. It was like a huge gift I got from Kratom, strangely enough.
Some people don't believe that you have withdrawals from Kratom. And so as an experienced multi-poly substance abuser, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's just such silliness. I can't even really engage with it. One, because Kratom is a really weird drug. It affects people extremely differently. Everyone's doing different strains. There's no like codification to it. It's not regulated properly. So it's just like, really, like, there was strains I would take that would do nothing and strains that I would take where I like couldn't function. Non-drug addicts use drugs way differently than drug addicts. So a non-drug addict using Kratom would probably not abuse it in a way that would cause real severe withdrawals. If you're a drug addict like I am, yeah, I was miserable for, it took me about 45 days to feel like completely better. I still had a little bit of brain fog, 2 weeks to sleep regularly. It took me about 20 to 25 days to feel about 90%. That last 10% came over 25 to 45, maybe as far out as 2 months before I felt like 100% better. But even then, there was real strong lingering like emotional and psychological effects that I never experienced on any other opiates, not even close to just that. I really think that's what drew me on that path. It was all like this insane wave of like negative emotions and weird mood swings and like just crazy thinking that I never experienced on any other opiates. It was always just like, oh, I'm clean. I feel great. This is awesome. Kratom was like, oh, it's doom and the world's messed up and it was just wild on SSRIs, but it seems like it's a combination of coming off opiates and SSRIs together. That's what it seems like in my layman opinion. And that's why I feel like a calling to do this, because I don't really like substance specific anything. I don't know. I struggle with it. But Kratom is such a weird drug that it sucks in people that don't know anything about addiction at all.
Yeah.
Like when I was using street drugs, I knew where to go to get help. 100%. When people are at the bar every night, they know where to go to get help if they find themselves feeling like they're alcoholics. But like, I feel like Kratom sucks people in that have no idea what it is. They don't know anyone in recovery. They don't. I just feel like there's this hole for the message of recovery to get carried to people that are struggling with Kratom. Find a way to fill that hole that matches with the 12-step fellowship that I enjoy going to and what works for the Kratom addicts that are out there. So I'm trying to bridge that gap right now and see how I can do it through a more like codified way. Yeah, I feel like there's this big blind spot with all these people that are stuck on Kratom that they don't know. They don't know the resources that exist for addicts. And I want to try to make them aware of that, you know?
I'm exactly the same way. I mean, I truly believe a drug is a drug is a drug. I've encountered people, like people that are naive to and kind of buy into the marketing and kind of get blindsided and get really hooked, and they're not poly substance users with long histories like us, and it's a weird qualities of it. I mean, I think it's pretty addictive. Your life isn't going to turn into a train wreck. And I just hear these stories of people being on a long term, then multiple relapses. Yeah. And I always have trouble. Like, should we just be sending people different fellowships or about Kratom specifically? But so hence, I guess that's that was the genesis of the whole podcast,
Yeah. I have these two competing parts of my brain, and one of them is like, it doesn't matter what the substance is, carry the message. It's a spiritual problem. And the other part is the reality on the ground is that there's people suffering that are abusing this one specific drug, and I don't feel like anyone is carrying any sort of message to them of hope. It's like I struggle to, like, I have cognitive dissonance on both sides of that, where I'm like, no, it's all the same. Everyone knows where to go for help. And then the other side's like, dude, no, these people have no idea. There's all these resources and they're just not aware of them. Isn't it our job to try to make them aware of them? And then it's like, well, yeah, but you got to get a service position. It's just, there's a lot that goes into it. And I'm trying to take my fellowship seriously this time so I can stay clean and trying to stay within the guidelines of that and not have it be like my way, because my way has just not been very effective up to this point. So it's a struggle for me. Even doing this was kind of a struggle on, like, is this right, or should I even be a part of this group and all that? It's still a struggle for me. So I'm trying to figure it out as I go.
Whenever you talk to your sponsor about something, that's usually the first sign you're doing the right thing,
Yeah. Speaking of, dude, I heard there was someone on your show that shared something. I listened to a couple of different people. Actually, this is a bit of a tangent, but this is like on my heart. I want to say this. So there was somebody,
Yes.
a guest that I really liked, and he said something like, between my ears, my brain is like a bad neighborhood. And I was like, that is awesome. That's such a good saying. And literally, and I hate to be a sniper like this, but like, this is the way my brain works being around recovery for as long as I've been around it, is literally like moments later, you ask him like, what are you doing, to maintain your clean time? And he was like, well, I write a lot. I think he said, I write a lot. I like to read a lot. And occasionally I'll go to meetings. And I just thought, bro, 2 out of 3 of those are you alone in your head. And it wasn't like a judgmental thing. When I listened to that, it made me sad, because I'm like, dude, reading and writing, dude, that for me, it's such a trap, dude. People that love to read and write are smart. Smart people struggle with addiction. It's a challenge. If you're reading a lot of books and writing a lot, like you like your own ideas. And I'm guilty of it. I'm super guilty of it. But that's why I make sure to engage with people that aren't me. And I take that. This is what I could say. Outside of a 12-step fellowship, if that doesn't appeal to you, that's fine. This is, and I'm going to give some advice here. We're supposed to give experience. I'm going to give you some advice. Okay. I'm going out on a limb. Find somebody that has more than 15 years clean off of every single substance, and ask them how they did it, and do exactly what they say. That's it. That's my advice to you. You're in a bad neighborhood if you're reading and writing. Go find somebody because this is obviously true in any other area. If you want to get good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, go find a black belt. Let him teach you, right? You're never just going to go try to make up your new moves and you're going to figure it out. Like in every other avenue, this makes total sense. But for some reason, I want to figure it out. And it's like, that's what got broken me this time, where I went like a horse, like I'm broken. I'm like, nope, my ideas suck, and that's okay. So I call people that have 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm like, hey, man, this is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And they're like, that sounds like a horrible idea. And I'm like, cool. That's why I called you.
Kratom in the headlines. Next week, we'll have the second part of the interview with Matthew over the Labor Day weekend. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between dependency and addiction. Not so much news or headlines. I'm going to share 2 articles from academics and activists. So first, the pro-Kratom community and the Kratom industry insists that there isn't such a thing as Kratom addiction, and that the most that there is a Kratom dependency. This is to push the narrative that Kratom is like a coffee or a tea. I feel like this is a real minimization with the tolerance and withdrawals that can be created with sustained Kratom use. The scientific and medical establishment decades ago made a conscious choice to start using the word dependency over the word addiction because it was less stigmatizing. So in much of the scientific and academic literature, you will see more a reference to dependency. I personally, when it comes to Kratom, I consciously use the word Kratom addiction, not because I don't know the difference between the two, because I think it more clearly states the extent of the problem that some people have with Kratom. All substances, only a fraction of people have problematic use. And I know the word addiction is co-opted by the larger society. My local news station just had a pledge drive where they were calling out to all news junkies. So the word associated with addiction and meaning has been stretched a bit in the culture and everyday use. So the first article is from Virgil. It's called The Word Addict, Why I Use It and Think You Should Too. The argument I make in this post is that addiction activism is important and necessary, but I'm going to start by talking about a different activist community altogether, the Deaf Liberation Movement. It goes on to applaud that community's accomplishments and their success in taking control of the narrative and destigmatizing the language associated. She talks about it through a sitcom called Switched at Birth. Then when she gets to the discussion about the word addict, this is what she says. I'm arguing here that we should reclaim the term addict. There are two primarily counter-arguments that anyone ever makes. They come across as meaningfully different, but I think they're basically levied by the same group of people. One, the word addict is stigmatizing. Pick a different word. Implied, it's all well and good to advocate for those people. Just call them something else. Two, you should not, in fact, be advocating for the group of people you call addicts because addiction is a medical condition best handled by doctors, not something to celebrate. Or you should be advocating for drug users at large rather than a small subset of them. She goes on to explain why that's not necessarily true. She then explains why not call yourselves people who use drugs? Why agitate for addicts? Non-addict PWDs are not vulnerable to addict oppression in the way addicts are. When a non-addict is punished for their drug use, our explanation of why they were wrong highlights the fact that the victim is not an addict. Meanwhile, our negative reaction to hearing that someone was oppressed often goes away if we learn the person was an addict. It's important to note that user movements often emphasize that most drug users retain social functionality. Doing so exclude us. Liberation is a zero-sum game. I think it's no accident that the vast majority of the people who tell me that I shouldn't refer to myself as an addict are non-members of that identity category. I think it's no accident that so many decriminalists, not unlike prohibitionists, want to view the drug crisis as monolithic, instantaneously equal harms as across race, class, and yes, addict lines. I think this reflects that the addict community has interests different from theirs, and bringing attention to us threatens their access to the stuff that they can use responsibly, but we can't. And I think that, in a nutshell, my friend, is what's going on. The second article is from a professor in criminology, Julian Buchanan, who I respect his work, but he is one of those absolutists that advocate against prohibition. So his article is called Beyond the Addict Addiction Paradigm. Addiction and addict are heavy-laden concepts rooted in a highly contested brain disease model, a model that demands total abstinence from all illicit substances as they only cure, and one that celebrates the identity of being clean. Clearly, some people do develop issues with drugs, and we need to make sense of this. So how can we move beyond the reductionist and binary frameworks of addiction and the addict? He concludes, people in dire situations, struggling with unmet complex needs for most of their lives, overlaid with patterns of enduring problematic drug use, should not be misleadingly labeled as if they are struggling with some pathological personal deficit. They are people first and foremost. It is time we move away from the reductionist, pathologizing, and inaccurate paradigms of the addict and the reductionist. These are inaccurate because we all use drugs, we all have habits, and all people lose control of habits to some degree. Resource of the week. Today I'm going to share something called urge surfing and a technique to resist it. My therapist recently gave it to me in an individual session. Today that my bad habits have been kind of reduced to maybe eating a second bowl of ice cream or an urge to like binge watch a TV show. I just recently heard about a really cool show called Midnight Tokyo Diner. And it's like 25-minute episodes that are just really story full, character-driven type of show. And I just heard a great review, and I've been tempting to watch it, but I'm scared that if I watch it, I'll end up watching a whole season all at once and not get done my work that I want to do, in all things moderation, my friend. So if you have an urge to take Kratom or have an urge for any addiction or habit or compulsion, try this. And I'll put a link in the show notes there's a great visualization of it. It's a wave, and it's kind of like surfing it. Urge surfing is a technique for managing your unwanted behaviors. Rather than giving up to an urge, you will ride it out like a surfer riding a wave. After a short time, the urge will pass it on its own. The technique can be used to stop or reduce drug and alcohol use, emotional reactions such as blowing up when angry, gambling, and other unwanted behaviors. On one axis is the intensity of the urge, and the other axis is the time. So at the beginning, you'll have a trigger. This is an urge triggered by a person, place, thought, feeling, or something else. Then there'll be a rise. The urge becomes more intense. This may happen gradually or very suddenly. It will peak. When the urge reaches its most intense point, it will feel as if the urge will never go away. You need to just get through that peak, and then slowly it will fall, and the urge loses intensity and eventually fades away. My problem with urges is they often feel permanent, and that's just never the case. How to practice urge surfing. Acknowledge you're having an urge. So you got to label it, stop, take a moment. Oh, this is what's going on. Notice your thoughts and feelings without trying to change or suppress them. No, it is normal to feel some discomfort during this stage. When you're having an urge, it's going to be distressing. And then remind yourself, it's okay to have urges. They are natural reactions to addictions and habits. 2, an urge is a feeling, not a must. I can have the feeling and choose not to act. 3, some discomfort is okay. I don't have to change it. And last, the urge is temporary. Like any other feeling, it will pass on its own. This is sort of a distress tolerance technique, and I will put it in the show notes. Please stay in touch on the social media channels. You can email us at kratomsobriety@gmail.com. We are looking for guests in September. We'd like to talk to more women. We'd like to talk to somebody who's successfully tapered. We'd love to hear about your experiences. And so until next week, keep it Kratom free.